What unresolved disappearance creeps you out the most? Mine is that of my friend Jamie Pember. I'm in Ottawa, Canada. When I was 12, we moved to our first purchased home. The next day, a blonde lady walked up to me outside and asks me if I wanted to be friends with her son. Weird, but fine. They lived across the street. Jamie was a very shy, isolated kid. His mom was like Norma Bates and he was Norman. She would ground him for 2 weeks for eating cookies before dinner. Insane. Jamie was artificially inseminated, and the two of them lived in the house with the mom's boyfriend Bob, a cop, and a quiet, nice man. Jamie was great at video games and playing drums. I was his only friend. We ended up going to different high schools as I took a variance to go to a school I preferred. Jamie was a grade lower, and after grade 11, his mom broke up with Bob, met a new man, and moved herself and Jamie to Niagara Falls, Ontario. The next summer, I had my license, and my parents let me take the 83 Malibu to NF to visit him. Despite being there for a full school year, Jamie had no friends and didn't know anyone in his yearbook. I planned to stay for a week, but after 3 days was bored as hell, made an excuse and went home. 2 months later, I'm sitting in grade 12 algebra when the classroom phone rings. In my mind, I jokingly thought it was for me, as I never got called to the office. The call was for me, and Mr. Salk told me to take my stuff, as I won't be back before the end of class. I go to the office, and the lady's stone face gestured me into the principal's office. Inside was the principal, the VP, and 2 plain-clothed cops. Jamie had went for a bike ride to get milk and never came home. When asked who could be harboring him, his mother could only come up with my name back in Ottawa. Regrettably, I told the cops I was not harboring him, nor have I heard from him since my return from Niagara Falls 2 months ago. Instead, I told the cops everything. About how his mom treated him, about how when I got my license, he wasn't allowed to be in my car, so I had to smuggle him out of our neighborhood while he crouched in the passenger seat in case his bitch mom was driving by. I told him how when we would go to the mall, Jamie was literally shoulder to shoulder with me to avoid getting lost. Had this occurred, he would not have had the common sense to find the bus back to Baseline Station and walk 5 minutes home. He would have just sat down like a lost puppy. There was silence in the office for 45 minutes as I talked, the cops furiously taking notes. They asked me if he could have gotten on the Greyhound and took off. I said no chance. They said his bike was found by the falls. Could he have jumped? I said virtually no chance, didn't have the balls. In my mind, the only option was abduction. Years later, I was speaking to an old high school buddy who was a cop in missing persons. I asked him to look Jamie up. He said he couldn't promise but would try. A few weeks later, he got back to me and said that my facts were right. James Pember, missing from Niagara Falls, summer of 1992, unsolved. I still remember you, mate. Inside me, you live on. Alyssa Turney. Stepdad Michael Turney took her out of school in early May 2001, and she hasn't been seen since. The police didn't look into it until 7 years later because Michael reported to police that she was 17 years old and knew where she ran away to. Finally, when police began their investigation 7 years later, they see that none of her money in the bank has ever been touched, and there are multiple reports from close friends, family, that she was sexually abused by her stepdad. The Fort Worth missing trio is pretty creepy to me. Rachel Trelica, Renee Wilson, and Julie Ann Mosley went Christmas shopping on 12/23/74 and never made it home. Julie Ann was the youngest one, only 9 years old, and asked to tag along that morning. That part just makes me even more sad about it, honestly. They wanted to be home by 4 p.m. because Renee wanted to get ready for a Christmas party that evening. When the girls didn't come home, the families became concerned and traveled to the shopping center to search for them around 6 p.m. The car was still in the mall parking lot with some purchased gifts in the car, indicating they had made it back to the car to drop them off. Rachel's brother, Rusty Arnold, is still involved in the search. Brian Schaefer. I know there are blind spots for the cameras, but it is strange that he just vanished from a crowded bar. I hope he is alive with a new identity, living the life he really wanted on a tropical island somewhere. Margaret Fox, and the phone call about the ransom of $10,000 being a lot of bread and her life being the buttered topping has always been creepy to me, even if it's never been proven that the person calling actually had her. Andrew Ramsey, Glasgow, 22nd February 2006. He was an accountant who was returning home from an evening out with his partner. When he arrived home, he was met by two men who claimed to be the police and then arrested him and placed him in handcuffs. They were not the police, and he was never seen alive again. His skull was found in the 5th Clyde a few months later. Two men were charged with his murder, but the case never made it to trial. He lived about a mile from where I used to live. I used to go past his house frequently over a 10-year period. The disappearance of Lee Ochi is one that creeps me out. She was left home alone for the first time ever when the remnants of Hurricane Andrew were passing through. Her mom tried to call her when she arrived at work and couldn't get an answer, so went back home to make sure she was okay, but she was gone. The garage light was on, and since its motion triggered, she must have missed whoever was there by just minutes. Blood was found inside the house that's thought to be Lee's, but she's never been found. Bryce Laspisa. The very odd behavior, the car found at the bottom of a lake with no trace of him left, all of it feels so wrong. Kiplin Davis is the first I always think of when people mention unsolved disappearances, but that one frustrates me more than anything. They know of at least one person involved, but he refuses to say anything, even after her father pleaded to only tell them where she was and promised to help his case, and they don't have enough to convict anyone. The Yuba County Five, February 1978. 5 men, ages 24 to 32, 4 being mentally disabled and 1 having schizophrenia, attend a basketball game about an hour away from where they live. They never return, and the car they drove in is discovered on a mountain road, something like 4,500 feet, right at the snow line. The men are missing, though the car is not damaged. What follows is the strangest set of circumstances ever. Strange witness accounts, odd details. Eventually, 4 of the 5 bodies are discovered like 19 miles away from the car, but none of this really answers any questions. Honestly, the most inexplicable case I've ever come across. It's impossible to come up with any straightforward theory. 2 great podcasts, Crime Junkie and Generation Y, cover the case. Highly recommend. I'm obsessed. My former landlord, Crystal Rogers. She and her boyfriend were both the landlord. I talked to her July 3rd. She messaged to ask if I'd left my rent check in their mailbox. The next day I heard she was missing. Her boyfriend said that they had argued and he went to bed. She was up playing a game on her cell phone. He woke up and she was gone. Had left their 2-year-old in his bed. That was odd to me because I rarely saw her anywhere without him. She had 4 other kids, had split custody of 2, and the other 2 lived with their parents. They found her car on the parkway with a flat tire. Her purse, keys, and cell phone were in it, and the seat was adjusted way back. She always had it way up, pretty much on the steering wheel. They never found her. The friend, her boyfriend, she said often visited, hadn't seen her in months. Said she knew her, but not well. She had been to a Tupperware party months earlier. The police said since she had 5 kids with 4 men, that she probably just left with a guy. But she had never did that before. Her dad began his own investigation. Then he was assassinated while hunting with Crystal's 10-year-old son. Told the grandkid that he saw something to go get his phone, bent down to look through his scope, and was shot in the chest. Megumi Yokota. She was a 13-year-old Japanese schoolgirl who was kidnapped by North Korean agents while she was walking home from school. She was put on a boat and taken straight to North Korea, where she was forced to train their agents to pass as Japanese citizens. Very little information is available about her after her abduction, and what has come out has come from North Korea, who is notoriously unreliable, and even sent her parents an urn that contained the ashes of someone else. I want to know about what happened to her. What did she go through? Is she still alive? This one gets to me. I can't imagine just walking home from middle school, thinking about a test or hanging out with friends, and suddenly being abducted by agents of a foreign country, put on a boat, and not knowing what will happen to you. Zachary Bernhardt from Florida, who supposedly went missing in the middle of the night while his mom was out on a walk or at the pool in their apartment complex. Mom moved to Hawaii quickly thereafter and changed her name, so that tells you something right there. Sarah and Jacob Hoggle of Maryland. Mom has schizophrenia and was only supposed to be with the kids supervised by another family member. She manages to take each kid out individually on her own and either kills them, drops them off with someone, or who knows what else. The kids have never been found, and she's in a psychiatric institution refusing to say what she did to the kids or where they are. This is creepy in a different way to me, but Christine Markham, because she disappeared from my hometown. 9 years old, she disappeared in 1973 after walking her siblings to the bus stop. There were a few sightings of her that day, but she's never been found. One of her last sightings is on a road I've literally walked down 1,000 times. I can't help but wonder where she's buried, because there's so many places. I also find it weird that she's basically forgotten. There's no posters up, no info, nothing. And I've lived here for 20 years. Ben McDaniel. He was a self-taught cave diver. He decided to go to the vortex in Florida. He was seen going in but not coming out. No body was found, no indication that he even went inside of the cave. Expert cave divers went and they found nothing, so his body was never found. If you haven't heard of this disappearance, you should look into it because it is so weird and confusing. The Skelton brothers from Morenci, Michigan. Maybe it is because my kids were about their age when they disappeared. I just kept thinking about their mom. She lost her 3 boys and never knew what happened. They were in their father's care when they went missing in 2010. Every couple of years, they opt out a new age progression picture of the 3 boys. I hope someday we know what happened to them. Charles Allen Jr., aka Neo Maximus Babson. Guy with bipolar disorder just disappears into the woods after days of seeming paranoid and on edge. Those kinds of disappearances, the ones heralded by a spike in someone's mental unwellness, always get to me. I have issues with mental illness too, but I can't imagine the fear that must set in to make someone just start walking in a random direction to escape something that only exists in their mind. That's horrifying. A case that happened down the road from me in the 40s. 2 taverns in the country across the road from each other. People migrated back and forth between the 2 during the night. Parents left 4 kids in the car, and they, parents, and several adults went back and forth between the 2 taverns until midnight. At the end of the night, the youngest son was not in the car. No one saw him get out of the car, the other kids asleep, and no trace of him was ever found. I googled it once and found one newspaper article about it, but even that seems to have disappeared now too. My personal cases that creep me out the most are Antoinette Caidito and Angela Hammond. Just knowing that someone abducted Antoinette from her home at 3 a.m. after answering a knock at the door from Uncle Joe. The phone call and restaurant sightings are unsettling, knowing she tried to escape and failed multiple times. Her mother may know more than she let on, but she passed. I hope Antoinette is found one day. Angela Hammond is more from the unsolved mystery segment and how close the boyfriend was to saving her, but then his transmission died and he had to only watch in horror as the guy drove away with her as she was struggling. And no one was able to ever find her, nor the guy who did it, despite the fish decal on the back of his car, and he dragged her out of the phone booth and never heard from again. The Sodder children. It's just unsettling to me. I don't think their bodies were burned to ashes. Household appliances were allegedly intact, so there would be at least some remains. The fire looks like it was started intentionally by someone too, with the cut phone lines and eyewitness reports. But how did the perpetrators manage to kidnap 5 children from the attic before or during the commotion, and why? There was no ransom notes, so it was probably not over money. The main investigator was acting sketchy as hell, even falsifying evidence to convince the Sodders that their children died in the fire. As outlandish as it sounds, my best guess is the mafia, but even then, the way in which 5 people just vanished without a trace from a full house is creepy.